People might forget the dishes they've tasted, but they will never forget how they felt when they left the table. These words cut like a knife through the invisible ice surrounding the concept of service. They remind us that what's etched deeply into human memory isn't a recipe, but a look, a gesture, a presence, things that seem small but possess the power to shape lasting memories. And from that intuition, a philosophy was born: unreasonable hospitality. This isn't a book teaching you how to set a table, choose wine, or run a restaurant. It's a story about how people can transform ordinary details into extraordinary experiences. The author recounts the journey from struggling to keep a restaurant alive to transforming it into one of the most memorable places in the world. But more importantly, that journey reveals that anyone, in any job, can apply the mindset of unreasonable hospitality to make a lasting impact. What is called unreasonable isn't madness or extravagance, but the courage to transcend conventional boundaries of reason. Instead of doing just enough, do a little more, delve a little deeper, be a little more human. An umbrella on a rainy night, a surprise dish that evokes childhood memories, or simply a moment of complete listening, all can become enduring memories. And paradoxically, it's when we dare to be unreasonable that we touch the most authentic layer of human connection, in an era where efficiency and speed are revered. The question is, if everything is reduced to formulas, spreadsheets, and metrics, will there still be enough room for warmth? If a machine can replace humans in executing processes, what is it that machines can never replicate? Unreasonable hospitality offers a bold suggestion. It's the ability to create surprise beyond expectation, a kind of unreasonableness that only those who truly understand and dare to give can achieve. So the question for the listener isn't whether they work in the service industry or not. The real question is, in our own daily work and life, have we ever tried to give something that seems superfluous, yet could become an unforgettable moment? If a small action can change how someone views a day, a relationship, or even the world, would we dare to do it? Even if it seems irrational in the eyes of the majority. This book doesn't promise a formula for success, but it offers each person a mirror. Success comes not just from skill or strategy, but from the courage to put people at the center and act in ways that many deem unreasonable. And it's in that unreasonableness that we can find something invaluable: the power to touch the memories and hearts of others. Let's begin reviewing this book. The moment the restaurant made it onto the top 50 list, but landed in last place, was a fateful night. Not because it made me lose confidence, but because it forced me to confront a harsh truth. We hadn't done anything that truly changed the game. That day, as the images of our two disappointed faces were projected onto a giant screen in a room full of legendary chefs, I understood what it felt like to be stripped bare before the world. People saw us as newly honored, but in our hearts there was only shame. On a drunken night with Bobo on the hotel steps, Daniel and I wrote on a napkin, "We will become number one." And below that, I added two new words: unreasonable hospitality. What's called unreasonable here isn't baseless madness. It's a stubbornness, even obstinacy, to pursue something many consider futile, to create an experience that makes others feel they belong, makes them remember forever, rather than just sitting down and eating a perfect meal. I understood clearly that famous chefs are celebrated for revolutionary, innovative dishes. But in my mind, the explosive idea stemmed from something simple: the primal human desire to be cared for. The difference between service and hospitality emerged from an interview answer I'll never forget. Service is black and white, while hospitality is color. Black and white is appropriate, precise, flawless. But color is how you make others feel about what you do. Serving the correct dish is service, but making the guest at the table laugh, feel understood, feel they aren't lost in the crowd, that's hospitality. It was this shift from black and white to color, from correct to beautiful, from flawless to connected, that propelled us further than any technical race. A memory at the Four Seasons is etched deeply into my childhood. On my 12th birthday, my father took me there. I had no idea it was an icon, a place that had welcomed heads of state, movie stars, and figures who shaped culture. But I knew it was a space unlike anywhere I had ever set foot. The tablecloth, the staff uniforms, the gentle clink of silverware against glass all created a separate world. The waiter picked up my dropped napkin, replaced it with a fresh one, and called me sir. A 12-year-old boy, for the first time, felt elevated to the same level as important figures out there. That feeling never faded. It wasn't just about the duck-carved tableside or the jacket I wore that day. It was an awakening, a place that could temporarily freeze the outside world, creating a magic that made you feel different. And in that moment, my heart was stolen. I knew I would dedicate my life to this profession. That experience wasn't just a meal. It was a silent warning that what I would pursue wasn't merely about food, but about how others remembered the feeling of being welcomed. There's a famous saying, people will forget what you did, people will forget what you said, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I'm not sure who the true author of that quote is, but I'm certain it's the purest definition of hospitality. After that meal, my journey began, but I never imagined that family challenges would teach me lessons deeper than any restaurant ever could. The story of my parents' of illness and enduring love was the silent ground that shaped all my subsequent steps. And from the dark corners of that small house, I learned the greatest lesson. Hospitality isn't just for guests. It's first and foremost for those we love and for ourselves. The story of my parents' of illness and enduring love began when my mother was diagnosed with a brain disease. From a vibrant, youthful flight attendant, Mom became someone who had to fight the brutal erosion of her body. The disease gradually robbed her of her ability to move, then her ability to communicate. But what she never lost was her welcoming smile every time I came home. Others saw the wheelchair, the feeding tubes, and the silent seizures. I saw the luminous eyes of a mother who, despite her betraying body, still chose to be present with all that remained within her. I remember winter days when I went to tennis practice. Mom would wait in the car for hours, the cold mist frosting the windshield, but her face would light up when I emerged. That waiting, that smile, taught me that welcome doesn't need words. It's an absolute presence, regardless of circumstances. That is the most primal form of hospitality. The memory of the music performance for my mother is another indelible mark. My band and I performed for her in the student auditorium. She sat there, her body still, but her smile was so radiant it could dispel the darkness of the entire room. As the melodies filled the air, I understood that hospitality isn't just found in a luxurious meal, but also in how you create moments that make others feel alive, connected. Later, an event completely transformed my definition of the profession. My father wanted to take my mother to my graduation, despite her complex medical condition, but just 2 days prior, she fell into a coma. I rushed back to Boston, and on a strange night, she woke up. After years of silence, she suddenly spoke clearly, asking me, "Did you graduate yet?" It was our last conversation, lasting for hours, before she slipped back into the darkness and never returned. At the funeral, instead of somber mourning, we played music, told jokes, and danced. We drank the finest bottle of wine on the saddest day, transforming loss into celebration. I realized that hospitality isn't always about joyous exuberance. Sometimes, it's how you transform a dark moment into just enough light for people to hold on to. It was during those days that I met Danny Mayer, a man who could sit at a student kitchen table drinking cheap beer from plastic cups, then transform a messy kitchen into a place where he cooked chopped eggs for a bunch of drunk students, a true genius. But also proof that hospitality doesn't depend on location, but on the spirit of willingness to share and transform ordinary moments into extraordinary memories. After my mother's funeral, my father and I went to Danny's restaurant. We were led into a glass-enclosed room overlooking the kitchen, where he and his team prepared each dish. No bill was placed on the table. There was only presence, care, and the feeling that the entire world had paused for a father and son to breathe. That night, amidst our sorrow, I realized that service could be a balm. Hospitality can heal the wounds of the soul. The more time passed, the more I understood. Hospitality isn't a technique, it's a way of living. It's the answer to the question of how we treat others, even when no one is forcing us to. It's about turning small actions into meaningful gestures simply because we want others to feel better. The power of intention entered my life very early. My father taught me that every action needs purpose. He cared for my mother, ran his business, raised me. All of it was based on prioritizing each moment. He didn't do it because he was stronger than others, but because he knew what couldn't be compromised. Living with intention means no action is meaningless. Every action, from how you greet a colleague, to how you place a spoon on a table, to how you look into someone's eyes, has the potential to create an impact. I learned to set specific goals, study at Cornell, open my own restaurant, live a life connected to hospitality. Once I knew clearly what I wanted. Every action became directed. Intention doesn't make difficult things easy, but it gives you the strength to step into any challenge without straying. In my heart, hospitality gradually became a grander definition. It's a combination of love, presence, and intentional will, from my mother's smile, from Danny Mayer's table, to the harsh lessons from my father, all woven into a red thread. Hospitality isn't just a job, it's how I define my very existence. The lessons of enlightened hospitality came to me when I started working in restaurants within the Union Square Hospitality Group. The founder, Danny Mayer, had a philosophy that turned everything I knew upside down. The greatest priority wasn't the customer, but the employees themselves. If you care about their growth and make employees feel important, they will naturally extend that to the guests. It seemed paradoxical at first, but this very paradox transformed hospitality into a closed loop, where both staff and guests were nourished. At Tabla, under the guidance of Floyd Cardas, I saw that clearly. He was not only a talented chef, but also a person who lived with intense passion and unwavering belief. I remember my first day, thinking I'd just observe the kitchen, but instead, I spent hours divining individual shrimp. That seemingly small task taught me respect for every detail. Then came the lesson when he told me to slice onions. I didn't do it well. He didn't scold me, just quietly left, then personally showed me how to hold the knife and slice with focus on every tiny fiber. From then on, I understood that hospitality doesn't begin in a sparkling dining room, but in how a chef meticulously peels an onion. The power of language in building culture was something Danny Mayer mastered. He created seemingly minor phrases that became guiding principles. Gentle, consistent pressure, to remind everyone to always improve. Be a swan, to suggest being graceful and effortless above the surface, while paddling furiously underneath. Or, assume positive intent, to remind you to always assume the best in others first. These phrases were repeated daily, becoming the very fabric of the culture, making the entire team operate as a unified body. Hospitality beyond the four walls also emerged from the smallest details. Like when a guest worried their parked car meter had expired. We didn't let them leave the table. We took their keys, went out, and put more money in the meter ourselves. An action worth mere cents, yet it surprised people and made them remember it forever. Such grace notes. Additional notes added to the main melody have the power to transform the ordinary into a magical experience. Contagious enthusiasm was something I learned from Randy Garrutti, who later became the CEO of Shake Shack. Each of his shifts was like a pre-game pep talk, full of energy, drawing in even the most tired or dispirited employees. I realized that sometimes hospitality isn't just about serving guests, but also about igniting a fire in your own teammates, making them proud to be part of the team. However, at the same time, I also began to see the limitations and comparisons between restaurant smart and corporate smart emerging when I spoke with my father. He told me, understand both approaches, don't just immerse yourself in one. A restaurant smart company allows chefs and managers creative freedom, prioritizing connection. But precisely because of less systematic control, they sometimes lose financial advantages, missing big savings opportunities simply because everyone buys ingredients from different suppliers. Corporate smart, on the other hand, tightly controls costs and systematizes every step, but the price paid is a limitation on creativity and personal connection. I witnessed this firsthand while working at Restaurant Associates. In the morning, I wore a white coat, inventorying refrigerators, counting every oyster, checking every box of vegetables. In the afternoon, I changed into a suit, calculated reports, watching numbers scroll across spreadsheets. Thanks to this, I understood that each number wasn't just a digit. It was connected to specific ingredients, to human sweat and toil. And when I discovered skyrocketing seafood costs due to rising lobster prices, I watched the entire analytical machine quickly find ways to change dishes, saving the company tens of thousands of dollars. That's when I understood that systems aren't meant to kill creativity, but to protect and empower it. But at the same time, I also experienced the stifling feeling when creativity was suffocated by absurd regulations. just moving a flower vase that obstructed a bar view a few days later, the design department from headquarters would move it back to its original spot. The beauty in the eyes of the guest was traded for soulless standardization. And at that moment, I realized that true hospitality truly needed both: the inspiring freedom of restaurant smart and the solid, disciplined foundation of corporate smart. Only when these two elements blended could a restaurant both flourish and sustainably endure. Those years taught me a fundamental lesson. Hospitality isn't just about creating moments, it's about building a foundation so those moments can recur daily. If not, it's just an accidental magic that cannot last. Building a true partnership was a turning point in my journey. When I started working with Daniel Hum, I didn't just see an extraordinarily talented chef, but also a soul forged in the discipline and rigor of Swiss culinary art. Daniel lived with an obsession for flavor, presentation, and precision. I, on the other hand, was obsessed with the human experience, with how every detail from lighting, to music, to the style of service could change how guests felt. If there was only one of us, the restaurant would become either a shadow, a cold, sensory laboratory, or a colorful but superficial performance. It was this combination that created power. We didn't always agree. There were intense arguments about whether a dish should be changed or if a service detail was too elaborate. But I realized that a true partnership isn't blind agreement, but the ability to respect differences, to learn to make space for the other's strengths. When I gave Daniel full authority over the kitchen, he also let me shape the guest experience. It was a division of power that doubled our strength. The art of setting expectations began here. Hospitality isn't just about giving a lot. It's also about managing expectations in people's minds. If guests walk into a place where everything far exceeds their initial predictions, they will leave overwhelmed. But if you promise too much and then just deliver exactly that, they'll feel disappointed. So the biggest lesson is to establish a reasonable baseline of expectations, then skillfully shatter it with surprises. I remember first testing this idea when customers arrived expecting a luxurious meal, exactly Michelin star standard. They sat down, greeted with elegant yet somewhat familiar offerings. But then we created a surprise moment, a dish reinterpreted according to the guest's childhood memory, specially prepared for them after just a brief conversation. That feeling couldn't be bought with money. It made guests realize they weren't just names on a reservation list, but the main characters in their own story. Unreasonable hospitality is precisely this. It's not always about offering more expensive dishes or more luxurious service, but about truly understanding the person in front of you and giving them something they never expected to receive. That could be a very small detail: a handwritten greeting, a surprise gift linked to a personal memory, or even just being present at the right moment. We began to build a culture within 11 Madison Park, where all employees were encouraged to think this way. When you work in a team where everyone understands that nothing is too much if it brings joy to the guest, you'll see the entire restaurant operate like a happiness-generating machine. Mutual trust between management and kitchen, between staff and guests, became the backbone of the entire experience. Success didn't come immediately. Sometimes we failed. Sometimes surprise ideas turned out awkward. But each stumble only made us understand more clearly that the right path isn't the safe one, but the one that dares to do what others deem unreasonable. Because it's precisely in that unreasonableness that you open up irreplaceable moments. As I look back on this journey, from the moment of shame on the top 50 list, to memories with my parents, to the collaboration with Daniel and the team, I see a continuous thread. Hospitality isn't about adding color to a painting. It's about transforming the painting itself into a vibrant world where everyone feels they have a place. And that was just the beginning. In an environment where people often say, "This is how it's always been done," I chose a different path, breaking rules to build a team. The culinary industry is often obsessed with perfect resumes, graduating from prestigious schools, working at renowned restaurants, boasting a list of awards. But I soon realized that if you only look at paper, you'll miss the people who can truly make a difference. Eyes that light up when talking about customers are more important than a prestigious degree. Clumsy hands, but with a thirst for learning, can become a more resilient companion than a star who only knows how to embellish their resume. Hiring people, not just resumes, is a courageous choice because each new hire, beyond filling a position, sends a clear signal. They convey a clear message. This is the kind of culture we are building. Every time I made such a choice, I wondered if this person would make the team's fire burn brighter or cause it to flicker out. It was no longer an individual matter, but a responsibility to the entire community forming within the restaurant's walls. We began to talk a lot about the culture bonfire. A bonfire only flares up if many people contribute wood, blow wind, and keep the flame burning brightly. A few people might start with a spark, but only when everyone on the team is engaged does the fire become something that warms the entire collective. To achieve that, I encouraged every act of care, from employees helping each other adjust uniforms to a waiter leaning down to converse with a guest instead of standing stiffly. Caring is often considered a weakness, but we wanted to reverse that, to make caring cool. When the whole team valued paying attention to each other, naturally no one felt awkward performing an extra thoughtful gesture. We told each other stories of times a team member helped a guest fix a stuck zipper on their coat or carefully held an umbrella for guests stepping out into the rain. The stories spread, turning into shared pride. And then, cool was no longer about showing off personal skills, but about the moment you made someone feel valued. But in any team, tension is inevitable when everyone is caught up in the pressure to achieve perfection. Daily friction occurs, and to prevent it from turning into cracks, Daniel and I introduced a seemingly simple rule that completely changed how we operated. Don't take your anger home. This rule meant that before leaving the restaurant, if there was a disagreement, both parties had to sit down and talk it out. Not necessarily agreeing on everything, but understanding each other before walking out the door. I remember one busy evening, two employees arguing heatedly right in the middle of the kitchen. At the end of the shift, one of them was about to leave. I stopped him and reminded him of the rule. They reluctantly sat down. 30 minutes later, both emerged with relieved smiles. The next day, I saw them working together smoothly, even sharing more ideas with each other. It's these small moments that keep a team from falling apart. If anger is left overnight, the next day it will double, then triple. And one day, you'll see a seemingly cohesive team suddenly crack without understanding why. Breaking rules doesn't mean abolishing everything. It's about selectively replacing what is old and rigid with something that nurtures a new culture. No one remembers you for adhering to every standardized procedure, but they will remember how you dared to do things differently to make the team better. Building a team isn't about rigid discipline, but about connection nurtured through every small action. That's the lesson that made me believe culture isn't a slogan, but a reality recreated daily. Once that bonfire was burning brightly, people started sharing stories. New rules became instinctive. People no longer needed them enforced. Because the entire team understood they were the ones tending the fire, and once a collective chose to burn together, no ambition was too far-fetched. Once the culture bonfire was ablaze, the next thing to do was define why we were lighting it. I've witnessed many teams bursting with enthusiasm, but they quickly burned out because no one knew what they were striving for. Enthusiasm became an endless loop. That's why I often reiterated, work with purpose, not just for the sake of it. Unreasonable hospitality isn't about chasing every opportunity and certainly not about trying to please everyone. We learned to say no to requests that would exhaust the team just to save face. Not clinging to ideas that sounded good but were far removed from the restaurant's soul. Not trying to be everything to everyone is the only way to retain identity. Because if you try to please every guest with the same formula, in the end, you won't make anyone feel special. I began to encourage the team to clearly define the intention behind every action. A new dish wasn't just to show off technique, but because we wanted to evoke a memory or stir an emotion. A decision to change the lighting wasn't just to look better, but to make the guest feel they were at the center of the stage. When employees understood the why, their work was no longer merely procedural, but became part of a larger story. I believe strategy is for everyone, not just for leaders. Many think strategy involves closed-door meetings in boardrooms with charts and long-term plans. But in a restaurant, strategy must be in the waiter's mind as they place a plate on the table, in the sommelier's thoughts when recommending a wine, in the receptionist's actions when greeting a guest. Everyone must know why their work is important, why they are present today. Otherwise, hospitality will just be disconnected, soulless actions. In the journey to turn intention into reality, I realized a seemingly simple principle that completely changed how we operated. Personalization always triumphs over luxury. People often confuse hospitality with extravagance. The more expensive, the more luxurious, the more hospitable. But in reality, it's the opposite. I could give a guest a vintage champagne worth thousands of dollars and receive a polite smile. But when I listened as they mentioned their childhood, about the hot dog they used to eat on the streets of New York, and decided to bring a steaming hot dog, placing it before them in the setting of a Michelin 3-star restaurant, that moment was etched forever in their minds. Luxury is giving more. Hospitality is thinking deeper. That hot dog moment became a legend that spread throughout the team. It proved that true value lies not in cost, but in connection. A $2 dish can carry 1,000 times the power of luxurious items if it touches the right memories and hearts. To maintain this, we formed a principle called the 95-5 rule. For 95% of the time, we operated efficiently, disciplined, not wasteful, from using reasonable budgets for ingredients to not squandering resources on things guests wouldn't notice. But the remaining 5% we dedicated to unreasonable moments. That could be when we closed the restaurant for a night, took the whole team out to bond. Or when it snowed for the first time in the lives of some tropical-born staff, we dropped all schedules, took them to the park to throw snowballs and see a snow-covered New York. These seemingly irrational moments were precisely the glue that bound the team together and transformed hospitality into something truly extraordinary. The important thing is balance. If you're always extravagant, everything becomes commonplace, losing its magic. But if you know how to hold tight to 95% discipline, then unleash 5% surprise, each moment will become an unforgettable legend. That's how unreasonable hospitality doesn't just live in a meal, but becomes the very skin of the entire collective. Looking back, I see that 95-5 isn't just a number. It's a philosophy of life, holding firm to discipline to nurture creativity, scrimping every penny, then not hesitating when magic needs to be made. And above all, it taught us that hospitality isn't a race for money, but the art of allocating heart and attention at the right time, in the right place. Once a team has a common fire and clear intention, the next thing is how to get everyone to truly collaborate instead of just working in parallel. I realized that a culture of collaboration doesn't start with grand ideas, but with how we listen to the smallest details. In many meetings, some employees only dared to voice a small, seemingly trivial opinion. If the initial reaction was dismissiveness or sarcasm, I knew for sure they would never speak up again. But if the reaction was an acknowledgement, showing them that the idea had value, they would continue to contribute, and gradually, the biggest ideas came from the quietest people. How you respond the first time determines the entire creative future of the team. I gradually changed my leadership style. Instead of solving all the problems, I started to empower more. Good leaders create more leaders. A young kitchen manager might tremble when first allowed to coordinate an entire shift independently. But if he does well, the new confidence will ensure he never returns to his old state. If he didn't do well, we'd fix it together. But at least he had taken a big step forward. Power isn't a seat, it's the transference of trust. And once the team began to operate based on mutual trust, the restaurant was no longer a rigid structure, but became a vibrant living entity. In that process, I also understood that competition could become a renewable energy source if placed correctly. Worthy competitors in the industry weren't just pressure, they were also the reason we dared to elevate ourselves. Every time EMP heard another restaurant had won an award, instead of complaining, we analyzed what they did better, how we could learn and go further. A strong competitor prevents you from resting on your laurels, and that is truly a gift. But there's one principle I consider a guiding star in operating the team: the last note rule, or the 1-inch rule. Like a concert, the audience won't remember every single note, but they will remember how they felt when the song ended. In a restaurant, it's the same. Guests might not remember all 15 dishes on the menu, but they will remember the waiter's gaze when placing the final dessert or the gesture of bidding them farewell at the door. The very last inch of the journey is what determines a lasting memory. Once, after a 4-hour meal, guests stepped outside. We realized it was lightly raining, but no one had an umbrella ready. In that very moment, a staff member ran to get a clean towel, sheltering them all the way to the taxi. In that moment, they might forget the names of the dishes, but they certainly wouldn't forget the feeling of being cherished until the very last second. Perfection isn't in the total number of hours, but in the lingering final moment. The 1-inch rule also applied internally. At the end of a shift, instead of rushing home, I reminded everyone to look around. Were there any unfinished details? A crooked chair, an unpolished knife, or a staff member who just had a tough shift and no one had checked in on? It's those 1 inches that make all the difference. We weren't perfect because we made no mistakes, but perfect because we didn't let the smallest oversight become the final memory. Looking back, I saw that collaboration, empowerment, healthy competition, and holding on to the last note were the 4 elements that transformed EMP from a good team into a remarkable one. We didn't just serve meals, we wove memories where every detail, from the smallest to the very last, carried the same message. You matter to us. There's a paradox in the pursuit of perfection. The closer you get to technical perfection, the greater the risk of losing genuine human emotion. We once fell into that trap. A dish could achieve absolute precision. A cocktail mixed to the exact recipe, drop by drop. But if the guest found it cold and impersonal, all the effort became meaningless. I learned a bitter lesson. Being correct isn't necessarily enough, because the guest's feeling is the truth. I remember a guest complaining that a dish was too salty. In the kitchen, Daniel and the entire team immediately reacted. The recipe was correct, the salt amount perfectly standard. But a technically correct response overlooked something crucial. If the guest found it salty, then for them, it genuinely was salty. We had to choose between proving the recipe or proving that they were more important than the recipe. From then on, we decided to always side with the guest's feelings, because hospitality isn't a court of taste. It's the art of understanding. At the same time, I began to realize another problem. Sometimes, precisely because we wanted to give more, we diluted the experience, as more isn't necessarily better. There were meals so long, with so many dishes, that guests left with heavy, full stomachs but faded memories. We had confused abundance with meaning. So we learned to simplify instead of piling on. We curated instead of trying to impress with quantity. We sought to impress with depth. Unreasonable hospitality isn't about exhausting guests with the experience, but about leaving them still wanting to converse, still remembering every detail of that journey. I realized that the team also needed to be nourished with proper encouragement and tangible proof, not just with empty praise, but with concrete evidence that the path we were on was the right one. An article written about EMP, an award for hospitality, or even a handwritten letter from a customer. These things became a mirror, reminding us that seemingly invisible efforts had indeed touched people. These proofs were no less important than training sessions or speeches. They were the fuel for the entire team to keep moving forward. And then came a phase when we understood we needed to restore balance to breakthrough after years of tireless experimentation. Pushing every boundary, the restaurant gradually became complicated and convoluted, too many overlapping ideas, too many elaborate details, but without the initial clarity. Daniel and I were forced to sit down and look squarely at the problem. We are overwhelming ourselves. The solution wasn't to add more, but to strip away. We eliminated superfluous things, keeping only the core essentials. As simplification occurred, a new feeling permeated the restaurant: clarity, lightness, yet no less profound. We were still unreasonable, but no longer disorganized. Hospitality returned to its natural rhythm, warm, surprising, and permeating every detail. And it was then that results began to come for hospitality, praise from guests, and finally, the highest position we had ever dreamed of. What I learned from this period is that excellence isn't about constantly adding, but about knowing what to remove. Like a piece of music, sometimes silence creates the power for the melody. Hospitality, ultimately, isn't an endless series of actions, but a delicate balance between doing and pausing, between speaking and silence, between technical precision and human emotion. As EMP emerged from that phase, I knew we had found our true identity, an identity not bound by formulas or achievements, but defined by the ability to transform any moment from a complaint to a first snow night into an unforgettable memory. And that's when we understood that the path of unreasonable hospitality was still long, but the foundation was stronger than ever. Crisis struck like an unannounced storm. In 2008, the global economy faltered, and in that instant, we knew we couldn't just sit still and wait for the storm to pass. Because if we only hunkered down defensively, we would slowly die. So I chose a different path. The best defense is a good defense. We refused to close, refused to retreat. We decided to find a new path. Right in the midst of the chaos, revenue plummeted daily. Luxurious dinners became an extravagance and out of touch. Regular customers sought to celebrate anniversaries in the park with a box of fries instead of sitting under the warm glow of EMP. I read financial reports every night like someone scrutinizing shadows by candlelight. The glaring red numbers showed unceasing losses. But amidst that desperation, I understood that hope didn't lie in grand solutions, but in the smallest things. Many drops make an ocean. We began to scrutinize every detail, saving bit by bit. A 4-star restaurant incurred enormous daily costs. But within that, there were hundreds of places to save, reducing expenses no one noticed, cutting anything that didn't affect the customer experience. Every saved dollar became a brick building a protective wall, preventing us from being swept away. But financial discipline was half the story. The other half lay in the question, how do we turn crisis into opportunity? Adversity, if merely endured, will crush us. But if we harness it, it becomes a catalyst for creation. In a situation where everyone was tightening their belts, we chose to open up new experiences. At lunch, instead of leaving the dining room empty, we created more reasonably priced menus, still retaining the soul of EMP but making it accessible to new guests. It didn't just fill seats, it also kept the heartbeat of the team alive. Because if the room slowly died, the fire within the staff team would also dwindle. Keep the team and the gas on at all costs. Keep the team feeling they were still fighting, still seen, and still needed. Sometimes the solution wasn't in the dish itself, but in how we told the story around it. I learned that it doesn't have to be big to work. A dessert could be served later, just to give guests time to savor the moment before the night ended. A small detail in presentation could transform an ordinary experience into something people felt was special. Not everything requires a large cost. What's important is the feeling people take away. The truth isn't the recipe or the price, but the impression left in their minds. In the most difficult days, I began to see every meal as a battle. No battle was allowed to be conceded. Instead of shrinking our dreams, we maintained our ambition to make people leave the restaurant feeling they had just lived in a different world, a place where hospitality wasn't just service, but the art of creating faith in tomorrow. When the economy outside was dark, the light in EMP's dining room still shone brightly from unreasonable details. Sometimes it was a surprise dish, sometimes just the way we were present with guests. Paradoxically, the crisis became the most rigorous training period. It taught me that strength isn't in wealth, but in the ability to gather every small drop to form an ocean, not in enduring adversity, but in transforming adversity into a springboard, not in waiting for better days, but in acting even when darkness still covers everything. And it was in those nights, when everything seemed to collapse, that we laid the foundation for our greatest victories later, not through magic, but through the discipline of every dollar, the boldness of every decision, and the belief that advancing even in a storm is the only way to survive in a world where every gesture can be scrutinized. The hardest thing sometimes isn't perfection, but naturalness. I soon realized that naturalness isn't given, it must be earned. You can't walk into a room and immediately behave as if you're already familiar with guests. First, you have to prove you have competence, discipline, respect. Only then does the atmosphere allow you to shed the formal layers to become intimate. Earned informality was the lesson that reminded me that intimacy is a reward, not a default. In the early nights at EMP, we maintained formality like a suit of armor. But gradually, as guests placed their trust in us, we invited them to cross the boundary. A glass of wine poured without excessive solemnity. A small story about a staff member's childhood told right at the table. These details made guests laugh and barriers dissolved. That naturalness didn't break professionalism, it complemented it, like an instrument adding color to an orchestra. The second thing I learned was the power of being present, being fully present. There were times I found myself stuck in a to-do list, eyes glued to the clock, mind thinking about bills or tomorrow's meeting. Hospitality. Distraction is the enemy. Guests don't need you to serve them fastest or most precisely, but they need you to truly be there. An unhurried glance. A question spoken from genuine care can make them feel more important than any elaborate dish. Presence is simple yet rare, because it requires us to abandon our busy selves to listen to others. Also in that process, I had to clearly distinguish between what was reasonable and what was unreasonable, and when to step across the line. Unreasonable hospitality isn't a list of duties, it's a living dialogue. Sometimes, being unreasonable is precisely the most reasonable thing. A customer said they hated a certain ingredient. Instead of forcing them to try it, we turned it into an opportunity to create a surprise, bringing out a different dish, proving that their preferences were heard. Conversely, sometimes guests' requests were beyond our capabilities, and we had to set limits. But we still did it in a way that made them feel respected. Hospitality isn't unconditional assent, it's knowing how to say yes and no in a way that the other person still feels heard. Once a guest expressed disappointment about a dish. In the kitchen, the chefs insisted the recipe was perfectly accurate, cooking temperature precise to the second. But then I recalled, perception is reality. The guest's perception is the truth. It didn't matter how technically correct we were. If the guest felt it was wrong, then for them, it truly was wrong. By accepting this principle, we stopped trying to prove ourselves right. Instead, we focused on remaking the experience for them. Once guests left with a smile, the final memory was what they carried, not an argument about right or wrong. When I put these things together, I saw a beautiful paradox. To become natural, one must begin with formality. To truly excel, one must not only be technically correct, but also resonate with the guest's emotions. To nurture unreasonable hospitality, one must learn to turn it into a conversation, not a one-sided performance. And it was thanks to these lessons that EMP crossed a new threshold, becoming not just a standard-setting restaurant, but a place where guests felt like they were conversing with a trusted friend, even while sitting in the most luxurious room in the world. When I started talking about unreasonable hospitality, many thought it came only from impulse, spontaneous creativity, fleeting flashes of inspiration. But the truth was different. Improvisation cannot exist without a systematic foundation to support it. Improvisation isn't a reckless act, but the art of transforming surprise into a cherished experience in the restaurant. There are situations that cannot be planned for. A guest arriving late and looking exhausted. A couple unexpectedly wanting to celebrate a birthday that very night. If staff had to awkwardly find someone responsible or fumble around asking if they were allowed to do something, the moment would be lost. Conversely, if there's already a culture of readiness and supporting tools, improvisation becomes natural. We didn't write scripts for every scenario, but we trained everyone to understand. If an opportunity arises, seize it, and trust that the team will back you up. It was in those moments that I realized the value of finding the legend, seeking out legendary stories. A legendary moment doesn't need to be grand, it just needs to touch the heart of the person in front of you. Once, a tourist from Chicago mentioned he missed the street barbecue from home. I immediately sent someone to buy ingredients from the market while the head chef transformed it into a refined dish. When that plate of food was placed on the table, tears welled up in his eyes. It wasn't just a dish. It was a door opening to memories. And that moment became a legend that spread through the team, a reminder that the greatest hospitality is ultimately personalized hospitality. The interesting thing is, it's addictive. Once you experience the joy of seeing someone stunned by an unexpected extra, you'll want to do it again. And again, it spreads like a chain reaction. One employee gives a guest a handwritten card. Another, seeing this, immediately thinks of a different surprise. Unreasonable hospitality becomes a habit, no longer an exception. And when the entire team considers giving extra as a default, guests feel a rare the energy of a place where everyone genuinely wants you to be happy. However, to prevent these actions from becoming chaotic or disorganized improvisation, I realized we needed to create a toolkit. Some gestures could be standardized. How to record guests' personal preferences for future reference. How to coordinate between kitchen and service when a surprise is needed. Small items ready to be customized on the fly. That toolkit was like a treasury of tested ideas, helping the team feel confident when improvising. More importantly, it kept unreasonable hospitality from becoming a repetitive act, ensuring it was always fresh. Over the years, I also realized that hospitality isn't exclusive to the restaurant industry. It's in every business. The opportunity for hospitality exists in any field. A real estate agent could show clients a house with a personalized map and notes instead of glossy flyers. A tech company could acknowledge each conference attendee by name instead of sending mass emails. In every industry, the difference isn't in the product, but in the feeling people get when they interact with you. And anywhere, personalization thinking deeper instead of giving more always wins. Unreasonable hospitality was no longer confined to the dining room. It became a philosophy of life and work, always ready to improvise, always seeking legends, always seeing, giving more as a joy, and always building tools to ensure surprise was a capability, not just luck. Scaling a successful restaurant was never just about adding more tables or opening more branches. The real challenge lay in how to preserve the soul while the body grew larger. I learned that scaling a culture is more important than scaling a brand. Culture isn't a slogan on the wall, it's actions repeated daily until they become reflexes. We began to view creativity as a practice, not a spontaneous whim. At the start of each shift meeting, the team would share the small, unreasonable moments they had created yesterday. When an employee recounted saving the last pastry for a guest because he knew it was tied to their childhood memory, the entire room lit up. These stories became concentrated exercises, as if everyone was training their creative muscles. Creative practice was no longer a sudden flash but a cultivated habit. In the process of expansion, I also realized something important. Say sorry. A leader isn't always right, and an apology doesn't diminish credibility. On the contrary, it proves one is strong enough to admit mistakes. Once, I yelled at an employee in the middle of the kitchen for a small mistake. Afterward, I went back and said, "I apologize to you in front of the whole team." That moment showed everyone that mutual respect was more important than power. Similarly, we established the principle, no guest left behind. No one was allowed to leave the restaurant feeling overlooked or abandoned. No matter how busy, every guest had to be welcomed, seen, and made to feel they belonged there. But there came a point when our very elaborateness and unreasonable aspirations put us at risk of losing our essence. Too many details, too many attempts at surprise made the experience exhausting. So I decided to stop. Go back to basics. Back to basics. Serve as I would want to be served. If I went out to eat, would I want to be interrupted 5 times just to be served another surprise? Or would I want space to converse with my loved ones? Hospitality isn't a shower of fireworks. It's a balanced rhythm between giving and holding back, between appearing and disappearing. When we returned to the fundamentals, we saw more clearly what was truly essential and what was just noise. It was this return to simplicity that led us to a seemingly distant goal, to become most delicious and kindest, not just the best tasting, but also the kindest. That title wasn't awarded because we were more elaborate, but because we knew when to step back so guests could step forward, when to be silent so they could create their own memories. As I stood in that dining room that day, amidst the laughter of guests and the radiant eyes of the team, I understood that the long journey had crystallized into a simple truth. Hospitality isn't a technique, not a marketing strategy, and certainly not a performance. It's the courage to be present, the finesse to listen, and the bravery to let go of the superfluous and keep only the core essentials. When we started, we were just a restaurant in New York. But through unreasonable steps, by believing in the smallest details, by nurturing a culture where everyone found joy in giving more, we went further than imagined. And then, having reached the pinnacle, the only thing I still wanted to do was remind myself, always return to the basics, because that's where everything begins and where everything becomes eternal. Perhaps the most profound thing this journey left behind is a paradox. The smallest details have the power to entirely shift memories. A towel offered at just the right moment in the rain, a dish that evokes childhood, an unhurried glance. These seemingly insignificant things became the foundation for building a renowned culinary empire. That lesson isn't just for restaurants, but for anyone looking to make a difference in their work or life. Every interaction is an opportunity to plant a memory, and no memory is small. One more thing the book reiterates: people will always remember how you made them feel, not whether you were right or wrong. A perfect formula cannot save an experience lacking emotion. And that's why hospitality, in a broader sense, is no longer a concept in the service industry, but a way of life that puts others at the center. But without forgetting that to give enduringly, one must first create a culture that nurtures the very people walking alongside you. When we think about this, we might ask ourselves, in our work, do we sometimes get so caught up chasing metrics, techniques, achievements, that we forget the true emotions of the person in front of us? Are we operating our lives like a series of precise formulas, yet lacking a full presence? And if unreasonable hospitality can transform a meal into a lifelong memory, how might it transform meetings, negotiations, or even the most ordinary moments of daily life? This book doesn't offer a definitive secret, but rather a framework of thinking. See every moment of interaction as an opportunity to give something beyond expectation. You don't need to be a five-star restaurant, you don't need to be on a grand stage. Just dare to look more closely at the person in front of you. There, you'll see a child needing encouragement, a stranger needing a sign to believe, or a colleague needing to hear, "I see you." And it's when we take that final 1 inch that everything can change. So, my final question to you: if tomorrow, in your work or personal life, you could perform one small action that someone would remember forever, what action would you choose? And would you have the courage to do it, even if it seems unreasonable, even unnecessary by conventional logic? Perhaps that's precisely when you begin your own journey of unreasonable hospitality.